I didn't have any specific puzzles in mind when I started developing the game. They're all based on the environment and on the exhibits. So, for example, there is an exhibit in the electricity building that I read about that was made in the style of an Egyptian pyramid. And visitors would go into this exhibit, and there would be hieroglyphs on the walls, and these hieroglyphs would not be quite the real hieroglyphs. They included these various electrical elements, like wire twined together instead of snakes or something like that. So, and this was something that was actually there at the fair. And I could take that and incorporate that into sort of a hieroglyph puzzle then to try and retrieve a diamond. And there would be a mechanism within that exhibit then that you would have to try and puzzle out what do those hieroglyphs mean and so on. So each puzzle really came out of the research into what was actually there. And then once I saw what was there, I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting, and there's a lot of ways that you could manipulate that if you were there, and a lot of different puzzles that you can build around those objects and environments. The game started out as a pure text adventure, and in fact, for the first 3.5 years of its existence, as I was developing it, it was pure text. When I actually finished the game in a pure text format, and I distributed it that way. I actually put that text-only version of it and made that available on the Internet Fiction Archive for download for free. And a lot of people did that. And during that time period, a lot of people played the game and they gave me some feedback, and there was bug reports that I was able to fix. And during that time period, I had amassed a very large collection of photos from the fair, all taken in the 1893, 1894, and published around that time. And so I started to scan them all in, and then finding a photo that would go with each location. That proved to be a bit harder than I thought. There's over 300 different locations in the game, and sometimes I found that an exhibit that I chose to put in the game, I couldn't find a picture that would illustrate that. So in some cases, I actually changed some of the rooms at this point to match some of the pictures that I had. I was thinking that the pictures would just be kind of an extra added bonus, but not be that much of a change over the pure text version, because I don't really believe that all those graphics really enhance the gameplay all that much, But when I finished putting all the pictures into this game and went back and played it again, it really was a transformative experience in this case, because now you're wandering around, you're reading about it, and now you're actually seeing the entire fair. So I think in this case, where I was recreating this actual historic location, the photos really help to bring it to life and give it that extra piece. And once that all came together, and I looked at how it really transformed everything with those pictures, I thought I need to get this out to a larger audience, people who are interested in, not just people who are interested in interactive fiction, people who are interested in history, people who are interested in Chicago. They should all see this game, and I thought they would enjoy it. Well, once I added the pictures, and I started thinking that this needs to go out, and people need to. I need to get a broader audience than the traditional interactive fiction audience, and I came to the conclusion that really the only way to reach those people would be to get the game into a store. If I was just going to distribute this online, I don't know if making it a pay option would make much of a difference. But in order to get it into a store, it needs to be a product that the store can buy and the store can sell and earn a profit on and be interested in carrying it. And so at that point I decided that it needed to be a pay product because it's actually going to reach more people, more of the audience that I wanted to reach with this game if I charged for it than if I gave it away for free. That was the theory. Yeah. Now, the piece that I didn't really take into account is that I'm a horrible salesman, right? But maybe the type of person that spends 4 years coding a computer game is probably maybe usually not the same type of person that can go out and sell that game very effectively. So I did come to learn that. But I was able to go to a lot of gift shops in the Chicago area and approach the sales people there and talk to them about it, and they would be interested enough to sell some in the shops. And although it's really only been available in maybe a dozen shops, those shops continue to sell it. Even it's been 3 years now since I first started selling it, and they still sell in those shops. Places like the Chicago Architecture Foundation has a gift shop. That's been by far the largest sales venue for the game, because there's so many people who go in there, they're interested in architecture, and they get the game, and they love it. The Field Museum, gift shop, Museum of Science and Industry, so a lot of the cultural areas, gift shops have successfully sold it. I would like to move it into bookshops as well, but that proved to be beyond my sales abilities. So I get people from all ages who have written me, retired folks, business people, and kids, people who buy it for their kids and who play it. So it's been interesting. In the email that I receive, I haven't really noticed a specific demographic of people who are playing it. I've gotten a lot of interesting email from people who had great-grandfathers or great-grandfathers who worked at the fair or who did something at the fair, or people who have a special interest in a specific exhibit at the fair and a special history with that exhibit. And those people have often sent me an email, and we've had conversations about those. So that's been very rewarding, too, I think. And I've learned a lot more about the fair after releasing the game through the correspondence that I have with people, and sometimes they're delighted to see that the exhibit or the place that is special to them is actually in the game, and sometimes it's not in there, but they still enjoy the game anyway. So it's been good. The email has been very interesting to receive. I've participated in some discussions about how to really produce interactive fiction that will sell and reach a wider audience. But I don't think I've ever had any good contributions to those conversations, because a lot of it focuses on what kind of game, how to target what you're writing to a broad audience. A lot of it is audience-focused writing, and to me, the fact that interactive fiction is something that you can do yourself. You don't need a group of 40 people, and you don't need a panel of advisors trying to figure out what the best audience is. It's a real personal way to write something, a game. And when I'm doing that, I'm not really thinking about the audience. The audience is me, and this is something that I love, and I'm creating this game because this is the sort of game that I would love to play. And then when I'm finished, I want to share that with a larger audience, and I hope that there are other people who will appreciate it. But it's not something that I think of ahead of time. So what is the audience going to like this? Is the audience going to like that? How will that increase sales? I don't know the answer to any of those questions. I feel like if you're really investing yourself into this product, then you're going to reach other people who are going to be interested in that as well. To me, that's the way that you improve the sales and the visibility and so on. I think I think text-based games are a completely viable form of computer gaming today, and I believe that if there was a company, a distribution company, a production company who wanted to make some and stick them in stores, I believe they'd sell. I don't think that it's the hurdle that we're used to thinking that it is. Now, back in the 80s, of course, that was it. You know, those were the great games. Those were the games making all of the money. The Infocom games were the best computer games out there. Then as we got more graphics and more graphics-oriented, we dropped the text part, and you know, we got to games like Myst, which would be all graphics, and it's all these beautiful, you know, exploring these beautiful landscapes and so on and so forth. And the prevailing opinion is no one will go to their computer and sit there and read to play something. They want to see the visuals. They want to play with the Xbox or something like that. But in fact, what's happened since then? Now we all have the internet. And what do people do with computers most of the time that they're sitting on the computer? They're on the internet and they're reading. And they read a page and then they type something in. Maybe they type a new address and they go to that next address. Or they click on the next thing to go to the next page. And we read for hours and hours on our computers now. You know, they didn't believe that we would do that anymore. Now we're back to it. We're all reading on our computers. To me now, playing this interactive fiction game where you're reading and you're interacting with it, it's so similar to what we're doing now, what we're all doing, all ages, not just the core gaming ages, that I don't think that if we just put it out there and say, here's a text game, and we'll put it in bookshops and put it in computer stores, I think it's an easy sell. And people will embrace it. People who aren't traditional gamers, you know, the 18 to 36, you know, target audience for all those video games. Anyone can do it. So, but, oh, and I got some complaints about some of the things that were in the game. There's conventional wisdom of new interactive fiction games that you shouldn't have a maze. You know, mazes are old school. You shouldn't have to eat or drink or something in order to keep playing. You shouldn't have to sleep. Clock-based games are not really looked on as a good idea. They prefer to move time organically as the story progresses, you know, more of a chapter-based thing as opposed to a clock-based game. All of these things are conventions now, really, of the modern interactive fiction writing community. And I disregarded all of those. All of that stuff is in this game. And I left it in there. And in the event, you know, when I released it to the text adventure playing community, some of them did point out, oh, you know, I can't believe that you've got this. We have to go eat, you know, at restaurants at certain periods of the game. That's so old school, you know. But when I released it to this broader group of history buffs or just people who are interested in the fair and people who weren't really interested in interactive fiction, they wanted to visit the fair, and this happens to be the way that they can do it is through this game. None of them thought that those were bad elements to the game. It was just part of the experience, you know. And a lot of them were thinking, well, that's okay, you know, yeah, every day you do need to eat something and sleep. And it gave them more of a sense of you're spending a day after day after day on the grounds. And so it's sort of overturned the conventional wisdom of the sort of elements that you don't need to put into a game anymore. even though, in fact, those elements are often quite obnoxious. I argue they can be fun too. It just depends on the context. Right? It's just how you put them in there. So I never got anyone really protesting a specific element to the game, which I thought was interesting. But at the same point, there's nothing really shocking or gratuitously violent or anything else in the game that someone might take issue with either. It's very straightforward and family-friendly kind of game as well. As I was doing the research for the game, I was also doing research, of course, about the fair, because all of that research, so much of it was going into the game. One of the things that I was doing as part of that was finding out how the fair had survived since 1893, because they built this glorious city here in Jackson Park here on the lakefront, and then it all burnt to the ground right when the fair was over. And so we traditionally think that nothing survived, but in fact a lot of things survived. A lot of the exhibits, some of the buildings even were moved into other locations. And so throughout my research on the game, I came across more exhibits and buildings and so on that survived from the fair, and I started putting those all together. I think it'll make a nice book at some point, a travel guide, really, to visiting the fair today. But in the meantime, I put that together into a lecture. The lecture was about how to visit an historic event after it's already taken place. How do you reconnect with the past? And what I talked about at the lecture was collecting, which is one way that a lot of us connect and go to eBay and buy the old buttons and banners and books and so on. Another way is by visiting these places that are left, doing some tourism. And I talk about those locations. And then the third way was recreation, by computer simulation. And so here's another way to reconnect with the past, is to go into this kind of computer simulation of it and experience it as if you were there. So the lecture included talking about the game, and I spent some time in the lecture showing the mechanics of a basic interactive fiction experience, and how you would move around and how you could interact with people in the environment. So it was real nice. I got a very good turnout for the lectures that I did. It was mostly in some libraries, and I was invited to do the lectures, I think, because, of course, there was a book that came out, Devil in the White City. And that was something we haven't talked about yet, but that was the luck moment of writing this game, because at the same time that I had finished it, this book, Eric Larson wrote this book called Devil in the White City, which was about the building of the 1893 fair, and he juxtaposed that with a serial killer who was operating on the south side of Chicago at the same time. And a huge bestseller. And so a lot of people who read that book ends with the fair being built and opening. And so a lot of people who read that book turned to the game and said, now I want to go visit it, so that, I'm sure that helped with the sales enormously, just because of how popular that book was. I feel like the majority of people who have been purchasing this game, in fact, had never seen a game like this before. They just weren't computer gamers. It just wasn't in their history, doing something like that. And so then they come to this game, and I have gotten some comments where they said, is there some way that I can just look at the pictures, right? Or is there some way that you can make it so you wouldn't have to do the puzzles, and you could just wander around? So for some of the audience, some of the key components of interactive fiction, the interactive exhibits and the puzzles and so on, they'd rather just not, if they can avoid it. They'd rather just wander around the grounds. I've certainly thought about those comments a lot, and if I were to go back and do another game like this, I think I would have a game mode and a visitor mode, so that all of the game components were just shut off, and you could just wander around and explore and examine things without having to worry about the in-game challenges. I did that I did that for a bit. I thought I did it quite extensively in this game, but then as I've gotten feedback, maybe that's something that I can do still further. One of the things that I did, a lot of games start with a very small enclosed space, 2, 3, or 4 rooms, and then you have to solve a puzzle to go to the next area, and then you have to solve another puzzle to get to the next area. So the game is constrained by your progress with the puzzles. I didn't do that in 1893. In the first move, when you start the game, you could, from that first move to 99% of the locations in the game without being blocked in some way. There's a few locked doors and a few places toward the end game that you can't get to, but I made it very open. But that's a puzzle in itself, because now you can go anywhere. What are you supposed to do, right? So it's that becomes a challenge just in and of itself. So that was one comment that people had. Oh, that would be nice if you could just explore it. A lot of my friends who don't know anything about interactive fiction, their comment was, "That's great. Why don't you adapt this for the Quake engine or something like that, or some sort of 3D? Do it a 3D environment." So it is something that I've thought about, but I have trouble returning to a work once I've finished it. That's the biggest problem. I spent 4 years on the game, and loved every minute of it, and I love talking about it. I love getting it out into the stores and so on. But in terms of revisiting it to rewrite or to write it in a new format or something, I can't envision it. I have too many other ideas that I want to explore. But never say never. Right. The closest I got to finishing a work of interactive fiction before was in 8th grade, and I wrote something there was a computer fair, and I wrote a text adventure game in BASIC, and the parser was very rudimentary, and it was a little haunted house game. And what the judges didn't know, there were so many variables that I kept adding and floating as the game progressed, that you could only play for about 20 or 30 moves before the game just crashed, because of course BASIC, at that I was programming that on my Apple IIe, I think. So didn't really have it. It was not very effective. But it was part of this competition, and I got runner up. The games that won, of course, all had graphics, right? But that was a while ago. That was the early 80s. I was not extremely interested in that part of it, and figuring out the parser and everything else, and doing that kind of coding. That's beyond my level of computer expertise. So when TADS came along, that was the answer, to all my prayers, basically. And I've never actually looked at Inform on that. So I really spent a ridiculous amount of time on that, on just that sort of thing. So there really are a lot of objects that you can carry around and manipulate, and there's so many different locations, and there's different people that you can interact with. But I really did want to make it, you can try and go kiss everybody that you meet and see what sort of responses that there are. There's a wide variety of different unusual things that you can do. I tried to think of every combination possible. So, for example, one exhibit has a chocolate, a statue of Christopher Columbus made entirely out of chocolate. Okay, and at one point in the game, you do need to get a chocolate bar or something to solve a puzzle, and so you can rip the arm off of this statue, and then once you have the arm, you can try and give that as the solution to that puzzle, but that doesn't work. But then you've got this chocolate arm. So then I tried to think of every situation where that might be something interesting. Well, at the far end of the Midway, there is a group of, the Midway was where all the exotic, it was like a world village that was an extension to the fair. So there was a Javanese village and the Chinese theater. And at the very end was an African tribal group that in all of the descriptive text they said they used to be cannibals or what have you, who are all visiting Chicago, of course, and just being in this exhibit. And so you can give the chocolate arm to them, and hilarity ensues as well, and some sort of ridiculous bit there. You can when you're on, you can visit the reconstructions of the Columbus's ships, and if you go to sleep on one of those instead of in your regular place where you go to sleep, when you wake up, there's a dream sequence actually of voyaging to the New World. So I tried to stick in all kinds of every ridiculous thing that you could possibly think of to do, just to keep it funny and lighthearted. Because learning the history doesn't need to be boring. In fact, it's all very interesting. All of the politics around the fair, and all of the various opinions and things that people believed at that time. America thought that they were really, and Europe, they thought this was the pinnacle of we are the pinnacle of civilization, and then they put these other groups on display as like our curious artifacts of civilization. But at the same point, some of the exhibits are these gigantic cannons and weapons of destruction that very shortly were used in World War I, to some of the most barbaric battlefields in all of history. So you wander around and there's humorous bits, but then there's other bits that you're looking at. You just can't believe that it's really there, and people really thought that way. And sometimes it's enough to make you laugh, and sometimes makes you cry. Just to think about that was the way we were. So I tried to put. I think I put far too much into the game, and I tried not to put a lot of modern sensibility into the game. I tried not to put my own commentary into the things that you see and the things that you explore. I tried to make it, you're a person from that time, and you're exploring, and this is what you see, and let the player really get their own reaction out of the spectacle that's on display. It was an organic process. It just didn't, when I started out, I didn't think I'm going to make this gigantic text adventure game about the 1893 World's Fair. Really what happened was I just returned to Chicago after living in Japan for about a year and a half. And I spent a lot of time over in Japan traveling and exploring the history of the cities and places that we visited. And I got back to Chicago and I realized I'd never really done that with my hometown. So I started getting into the history of the city, and that's whenever someone's researching Chicago history, at some point you stumble across the 1893 fair, which was this just remarkable moment in the city's history. And it was just so fascinating, and I just started researching it more and more and getting into more detail on it. And I'd start going to libraries to find specific old books about it. I started going to different sites, places where there's still buildings left over from the fair. I really just started spending a lot of time researching it. And then I thought, I need to show something for all this effort. I need some sort of excuse to justify how much time, and I'm starting to collect things on eBay, and you know, there's this expense involved, and so I wanted to produce something out of all of this research that I was doing. At the same time, I was looking into writing text adventure games, and because I've always been interested in that, and I thought, I started looking at the TADS system that Michael Roberts developed, and I thought, and I was starting to learn how to use that system, and I thought, why don't I just put these two together, these two hobbies together, and make a game about this 1893 World's Fair. I wasn't sure what I was doing when I started it, and in fact, the first version of the game started out. I set the beginning in modern day Hyde Park and visiting the Museum of Science and Industry, and then once you visit there, have some sort of time travel element where you would go back in time. Right? But then I discarded that entirely, and I decided to forget the time travel element. I just want to visit, you know, the fair itself. So then I just started creating a map of the grounds, and then I started building each location in the game just by writing a description of each area. And what I was surprised about was just how each level got more and more detailed and more complicated. And at first it was just exterior, wandering around the grounds of the fair and looking at the outside of the buildings and so on. But then I said, okay, well, now we need to go into the buildings. And then I started developing what was inside. And at first, I didn't know what was inside the buildings, because almost all of the photo books and history books about the fair are about the architecture. So then that prompted me to do even more research. And I started digging deeper and finding specific exhibits that were in those buildings. And then I ended up picking out of all the exhibits in the building, maybe 1 dozen or 2 dozen that would go in there. And it took some time, actually, just in developing the grounds and the environment. I was creating sort of a living environment of the fair, so someone could go back in time and experience what it was like just to wander around. And I still hadn't come up with a story yet. Right? I was just really building a recreation of the fair. From there, it just started to grow. I came across an old story that was published around 1893. It was a detective story. And in this detective story, there was a diamond theft. And so I said, well, why don't I incorporate this fictional element that someone in that time period thought up, that this would be an interesting mystery story about this place. Why don't I take that and make that the mystery story of the game? So then I ended up incorporating a diamond theft as well, and then that gives you a further excuse if we then imagine that the thief has decided to hide all the diamonds everywhere in the fair and make it a scavenger hunt, as all good master criminals do. Then now you have a reason to go explore all of the exhibits even more thoroughly. And it just kept going from there. One of the things that I wanted to do in learning about the World's Fair was to go visit it. But of course you can't do that. So the first thing that I wanted to do is really set up an environment that let you go to visit the fair. But at the same point, then you need to have some sort of reason to be there. And so that's when the game elements come in. And then that allows you to linger at the fair and to explore more thoroughly than you might otherwise need to. So the game component is really put there to immerse yourself further in the world.